Trish just read us a text from the scriptures about taming the tongue. It's a very interesting passage, and James is still talking about our faith, and everything that surrounds the issue of faith has to be addressed in his letter. So he addressing, first of all, the fact that there are a lot of teachers that have come to be in the Christian church, and he is warning those who wish to become teachers that we may want to abstain from that position. In the early Christian church, teachers played a very important role in the local church. We learn from the letters of Apostle Paul, 1 Corinthians 12:28 and Ephesians 4:11, that apostles and prophets kind of precede the ministry of the teachers, and then the teachers follow these two initial ministries of the church. The church of Antioch contained 5 different ministry types, and teachers are listed there as well. New believers who were just becoming Christians would come to the local congregation or community of Christians that called the church, and they would be given to the care of the teachers in order to learn Christian doctrines, in order to learn how to practice these Christian doctrines in their lives, because they were either Jews or Gentiles in the past. Now they're entering a new relationship with God, they're entering new community of God, and therefore they need to learn how to act and how to behave in this new community. We learn from the New Testament that there were a lot of problems with different teachers. Paul and Peter and James addressed these different issues with the teachers. For example, there were some that were trying to force Gentiles to keep the Mosaic law. We read about it in Acts 15:24. There were also those that did not live in accordance with biblical standards and taught others to follow their example. That was mentioned in Romans 2:17-19. We also learn about the teachers that attempted to teach others what they themselves did not know. That was in 1 Timothy 1:6-7. And finally, we learn from 2 Timothy 4:3 about the teachers that compromise themselves by desiring to please the crowds. You know, we hear about these teachers even to this day. Teachers that are on TV trying to please the crowds, trying to manipulate the listeners and the viewers, and they don't teach the gospel. They're only going to read from the scriptures, and yet they're claiming to be teachers of the scriptures. However, regardless of all these flows of the teachers, James considers that it is a very dangerous and very responsible position in the church, because in its daily duties, they predominantly use speech as the instrument of their ministry. And in order to actuate the speech, you need to use your tongue. And that's an instrument that is in question in this entire passage. And we will look closely at what James is saying to his listeners. James warns the believers about the greatness of responsibilities of the teachers due to the methods and instruments that they use. Teacher in the Christian church was taking a place of a former rabbi. Let's say James is talking to the Jewish audience. They were formerly members of a synagogue, where the rabbi was the most prominent member of that synagogue, honored individual, and he had the highest respect in the community. In fact, to some extent, in the public theology of the day, they were teaching that if your parents were taken into prison and your teacher or rabbi is also in prison, you have to first liberate your teacher before you liberate your parents. So the position of authority and honor was even exceeding the position of authority and honor of their parents. Some people that were looking for this position of the teacher were tempted by pride and by position of power, and they were going to become like a tyrannical leaders of the community. And we see how Pharisees and Sadducees and some of the scribes were behaving in the modern day Judaism of Jesus Christ, where the honor and shame ethics were so prominent, where they wanted to pray publicly so others could see them pray, where they wanted to give money publicly so that others can praise them for their gift, where they wanted to perform something, some ceremony publicly so that the others will see and think, oh, how godly this person is or that person is. And of course, they also like to pronounce very profound speeches in the public places to be honored for their intellect and for their education and for the wisdom of their words and so on and so forth. Well, James is seeing some dangers in this kind of behavior, and he says in verse 2, very prominent two truths or ideas that existed in the philosophy of the Jewish society. Verse 2 says, "For we all stumble in many ways. If anyone does not stumble in what he says or she says, he is a perfect individual, able to hold in check his whole body also." Now, what does James say with this particular sentence? First of all, he's presenting two ideas, as I have already mentioned. First idea is there is no person that has not stumbled at least in something, right? Paul says the same in Romans, there is nobody who is righteous. Everybody who has sinned. The word stumble is the translation of the Greek word taimenapenantes. This word just means to trip, to stumble, or to fall. And as we envision our life as a path or a way, our particular actions in this life are called steps. It's a metaphorical use of the language. So going on in the regular course of right action is walking uprightly. And then actions that are missing the mark are considered to be tripping or stumbling. That's according to Clark in his commentary on this passage. Second thing that we learn from the Jewish thought is it is the simplest thing to sin with one's tongue. Such a sin can have a very serious consequences, and this thought took a prominent place in Jewish worldview. Jesus warned people that they will give an account for every spoken word. Matthew 12:36-37. In Proverbs in the Old Testament, we also read Proverbs 15:1-4. A soft answer will turn away wrath, but a word of trouble will stir anger. The tongue of the wise will dispense knowledge, but the mouth of the fools will pour out folly. In every place the eyes of Yahweh will keep watch over the evil and the good. Gentleness of the tongue is the tree of life, but perverseness in it causes a break in spirit. James's opponents could have argued that the tongue is such a tiny organ in the human body that it's not worth so much attention or discussion about it or even teaching on the subject. But he makes another claim in verse 3. He brings an example of how we control with very little things very big items or big creatures. Horse's bit is this thing in the mouth of the horse that when you pull on it, it controls the movements of the horse. It can stop the horse in its tracks, it can turn the horse to the left or turn it to the right. And you can tie up the horse to a post and it will be parked until you're ready to continue your journey and so on and so forth. So James is trying to say that the tongue in our body is the same way. If we are able to control this very tiny or small comparatively organ in our body, we are able to control everything else with much easiness. The second example that he brings up is the rudder of the ship, verse 4. Behold, also ships, although they are so large surrounded by strong winds, they're guided by a very small rudder, wherever the inclination of the pilot wishes. Aristotle used almost exactly same metaphor of the rudder, and he says that a rudder by itself is small, and it is attached to the very back of the ship. However, the small part of the ship has a power to move the entire weight of the vessel with a very insignificant effort on the part of the pilot. A tongue is so small, but it can direct the entire life of a person. Philo of Alexandria called a brain a driver and a director of a person's life. The life of a person, therefore, is safe if the brain is controlling every word coming out of it, and in turn, if the brain is controlled by Christ himself. Verses 5 and 6 continue this discussion on the tongue and compares the tongue to a fire. Let's read that again. So also the tongue is a small member of the body and boasts great things. Behold, how small a fire sets ablaze how great a forest. And the tongue is the fire, the world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, defiling the whole body and setting on fire the course of human existence, being set on fire by hell itself. Now, how many times we might have said something and then we regret it saying it? Or somebody else said something and it hurt you because of what they said, and that person probably did not even mean to hurt anybody. You know, a lot of times when I was preaching, people will come and say, oh, so-and-so got offended at what you said. And I'm like, I didn't intend to offend anybody. But, you know, once you say one word and 50 people hear it, you'll have 54 people that are offended in one way or the other because of the way we accept information. In communication, it is important for the speaker to clarify what he says and for the listener to make sure that what they've heard is exactly what the speaker meant to say. Otherwise, there's a breakdown of communication, and that's how offenses are being born. And that's how people stop talking to each other for years without even realizing what even was the cause of that miscommunication. So, the tongue. The tongue can bring a lot of devastation in our lives, just like the fire. And on the news we hear about California raging fires that burned out thousands and thousands of acres of land, even compared to the size of some smaller countries. We learn about fires in Russia burning, and the Russian government said, oh, sorry, we don't figure out that our resources are enough to even put out the fire, so they just let them burn until they stop by themselves. The cynicism of a situation is ridiculous, but at the same time, from history we know that there were no firefighters before, and in Judean desert, the fires were frequented. When James is bringing up this example of the raging fire, I think in every Jewish mind they would imagine the strands of grass and those low growing thorny bushes. They were so dry that one spark would ignite the fire that would be blown by those crazy eastern winds and would burn villages and desert and everything in its path, and nobody could stop it. So it was unstoppable power that James is comparing the tongue to. Sometimes, you know, when we are in the moment of anger, we say something that we regret for the rest of our lives that we have said, or we should, at least. And guess what? When you get somebody angry and something bad spills out of their mouth, you were not the one that caused that anger or those words to come out. That was already in that person, or in you, if you're the one in the example. It's what's inside of us